sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have submit and we have liftoff at 2:13. The Saturn V building up to 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
A quarter century later, it is still an awesome sight. A rocket, 33 stories tall, more powerful than the space shuttles of today, stabbing the skies over Florida. And yet, when Apollo 13 thundered off the pad, America wasn't paying much attention. This would be our third moon landing, after all. We'd been there before.
13 Houston, go at 1. We show the cabin relieving.
But for the astronauts who flew the mission and the men on the ground who guided them, spaceflight was never routine.
It's almost like rolling dice. Every time you go out there, it's risky.
Jim Lovell knew the risks well. By the time he was chosen to command Apollo 13, he was America's most experienced astronaut.
I think with each mission it became more difficult for me.
Marilyn Lovell had watched her husband rocket skyward on 3 earlier missions. This time, she had a disquieting sense that the numbers were catching up to him.
At the time, I told everyone I wasn't superstitious, but deep down, I really was, because I remember saying to myself, 13, why 13?
The flight of Apollo 13 began at 13:13 military time, 4 days from a scheduled rendezvous with the moon. But what no one knew was that amid the millions of pieces of sophisticated hardware on the spacecraft, one tiny part had a serious defect, one that would nearly destroy the ship and crew of a flight that began so flawlessly.
I felt almost at home. The sounds, the sights, the smells, the stars were all familiar to me.
On the flight with Lovell were 2 rookie astronauts, Fred Hayes and Jack Swigert, who was only added to the mission at the last minute when another astronaut was exposed to the measles.
Good evening, America, and welcome aboard Apollo 13. I'm Jim Lovell.
In the movie Apollo 13, Tom Hanks narrates a live tour of the cramped space vehicle. Ironically, this Hollywood version of the TV tour has been seen by millions more viewers than saw the real event.
What Fred is opening up is a drink bag.
In 1970, none of the TV networks was even interested in broadcasting the feed, so only Mission Control was watching. But soon, the entire world would tune in, anguishing over the flight of Apollo 13.
This is the crew of Apollo 13. Wish everybody there a nice evening.
They were nearing 56 hours into the flight. They were 200,000 miles from Earth, and the date was April 13th.
I got just into the command module when I heard a hiss bang and the spacecraft rocked back and forth.
What did you do?
The more pronounced sound I heard that told me that it was something fairly traumatic was a tin canning or buckling sound of metal in the tunnel area.
I looked over at Swikert, and Swikert's eyes were as white as saucers.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Lovell's voice was calm, but his heart rate jumped from 70 to 130 beats.
Our first inclination, I should say, was that something hit us, a rogue meteor of some sort.
It was just after 9 o'clock in the evening Houston time, and Mission Control went on alert.
When we looked at the data, everything was gone.
Cy Liebergott had the job of monitoring critical spacecraft systems like oxygen and power. He couldn't believe what he was seeing.
If I was to believe the data that I saw on my screen, I would see that I had lost oxygen tank 2 completely. I was losing oxygen tank 1, and I would see that I had lost 2 of the 3 power plants of the spacecraft. Impossible. That just doesn't happen.
Okay, now, do we have instrumentation problems?
Gene Kranz was lead flight director, the man who ran the mission from the ground.
One of the first calls I made to the controllers in here, I said, hey, what you're seeing, what you're reporting to me doesn't make sense. But don't do any guessing. Let's not make the problem any worse.
Main bus A undervolt.
Houston, we have a main bus A undervolt now, too.
The movie captures the initial confusion
We got a wicked shimmy up here.
and the professionalism that would mark NASA's most perilous mission.
Can we review our status here, Cy? Let's look at this thing from a from a standpoint of status.
What do you think we got in the spacecraft that's good?
For the first time, NASA faced a disaster that could maroon men in space.
We had to solve the problem. It was inconceivable that we couldn't solve it. That's not arrogance or ego, it's just that's what we're trained to do. It kept looking like there was no solution.
But the three men in their crippled cocoon needed a solution, and fast.
It was a very confusing array of warning lights.
And then I drifted over to the left-hand side, looked out the side window, and saw gas escaping from the back end of my spacecraft, which didn't require intelligence on my part to realize that very shortly we'd be completely out of oxygen.
The basic mission plan literally went in the trash can.
NASA would later determine that an exposed electrical wire had sparked inside one of the two oxygen tanks, causing a massive explosion that tore out many of the spacecraft's life support and power systems.
There's nothing, I think, that prepares you for a catastrophe, but and that's really what we were on the verge of.
All I knew is that we had about an hour maybe of oxygen left, and of course, when we lost all that, we would lose all of our electrical power because we used oxygen to produce electricity. And when that occurred, we would have lost our propulsion system because we control the engine by means of electricity. And so we were in deep, deep trouble.
In deep space.
200,000 miles from home, going in the wrong direction.
Nothing like it had ever happened in spaceflight. After the explosion, Apollo 13 was gyrating wildly, but there was hope. The crew had a lifeboat, the spider-like lunar module, or LEM, that was docked to the nose of the dying command module. Jim Lovell had christened it Aquarius.
We better think about getting in the LEM or using the LEM systems. I'm going to have to power way down.
Less than 2 hours after the explosion, the astronauts would try something never before attempted in space, completely shutting down their mothership to save power and relying on the lunar module to keep them alive.
We figure we've got about 15 minutes worth of power left in the command module, so we want you to start getting over in the LEM and getting some power on that.
Aquarius had its own oxygen and power systems, but those were designed to support 2 men for just 2 days during the actual moon landing. Now there would be 3 men in the lifeboat, and Earth was at least 4 days away. Outside the spacecraft, temperatures fell as low as 280 degrees below zero, and inside, the comfort level was dropping as well. The crew had almost no heat as a result of the explosion. Condensation clung to the walls, the delicate instruments, the wiring, and no one knew whether the dead command module could be revived. But that's what they'd have to do, because only the command module was built with a heat shield to survive the hellish temperatures of plunging into the Earth's atmosphere.
We didn't have a credible procedure, or any procedure that would turn a spacecraft on in orbit from a dead start.
John Aaron was a NASA whiz kid, just 27 years old. To him fell a monumental challenge: bring the command module to life again using very limited power, no more than you'd find in 3 car batteries. Like so much on this mission, it had never been tried before.
We had no margin. We were operating on the edge all the time. And every chip that we'd play, we could only play once.
Aboard Apollo 13, the sleeping quarters dropped to the temperature of a refrigerator, about 35 degrees. Food froze in its locker. So did the crew's water. Lovell had to ration it. Fred Hayes then developed an infection and fever. For 2.5 days, the astronauts endured the miserable conditions. Finally, with just a few hours of battery power available, the astronauts jettisoned the damaged service module. As it floated away, they could see for the first time how close they had come to absolute disaster.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing.
Just 3 hours now until scheduled re-entry, when Apollo 13 would hit the atmosphere at 7 miles each second. John Aaron had to revive the command module quickly.
We had a rendezvous with Earth. We were going to re-enter one way or the other, and it was either going to be a controlled re-entry or a totally uncontrolled re-entry.
With re-entry just an hour away, the astronauts hurried into the command module, closed the hatch, and cut loose Aquarius, their lifeboat, which had flown them back from certain death in outer space.
Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you.
But the danger was far from over. If the explosion had cracked the ship's heat shield, the crew might not survive the fiery re-entry.
I know all of us here want to thank all you guys down there for the very fine job you did.
Then Apollo 13 hit the Earth's atmosphere, a time when the astronauts would be out of radio contact. The blackout was supposed to last 3 minutes, but when that time was up, Mission Control heard nothing, only static.
It just seemed to go on forever. And I think I sort of choked up a bit during that period of time because I thought of all the go-for-broke decisions that were made. I just was worried that maybe we had missed something.
3.5 minutes. Then 4 minutes of agony. Mission Control's messages went unanswered. And then?
Odyssey Houston standing by, over.
Okay, go over.
Okay, we read you, Jack.
Odyssey Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
Everybody else was cheering, and I remember just sitting down and feeling, my God, we pulled it off.
And there comes the astronaut out, leading down the steps. It looks like Captain Lovell.
Never once during the mission did I say to myself, he's not coming back, or will he come back? I never wanted to believe that. And he had never let me down before, and I didn't think he would then.
Today, I feel a little frustrated for never walking on the moon.
Jim Lovell never went into space again, but with co-author Jeffrey Kluger, he wrote a book on which the movie is based, a chronicle of his final perilous flight on Apollo 13.
How has it changed you?
It really has given me sort of a sense of serenity, I guess you might say. I really think I'm living on borrowed time, and I could have left this world back in April of 1970. Every day is a day more than I could not have had things gone wrong in the flight of Apollo 13.